This winter, in a small mountain town, something impossible happened. A police officer found a silent German Shepherd puppy tied to a bench in the snow. No crying, no barking, no movement, just waiting. What happened next would change both of their lives forever. This is not just a rescue story, it is a story about patience, about hope, about how broken hearts find their way back. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and leave it in the comments. And if you believe in second chances, stay with us because this story will stay in your heart long after the snow stops falling. Winter had arrived in Northvale, a mountain town tucked between frozen pines and winding highways that few people traveled once December settled its crown of snow. The sky that morning was the color of pale steel, the kind that made the world feel like it was holding its breath. Snow drifted in slow, deliberate flakes, thick enough to soften every sound, thin enough to let the yellow streetlights bleed through like fading stars. It was 5:42 a.m., the hour when the town still slept and the wind spoke more loudly than any human voice. Officer Ethan Cole, 36 years old, was finishing the last stretch of his night patrol. He drove an aging black cruiser, its engine humming low and steady, a sound he had grown to trust the way some men trusted prayer. Ethan was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair clipped short and a face carved by years of quiet discipline. There was a thin scar near his right eyebrow, a souvenir from an accident on an icy road when he was 22, still new to the uniform and full of the reckless confidence that winter eventually erases. His eyes were steady, gray-blue, the kind that watched before they spoke. People in Northvale said Ethan was calm to the point of being unreadable, but those who worked beside him knew it wasn't emptiness, it was restraint. After losing his younger brother in a snowstorm 5 winters earlier, Ethan had learned that emotions, when left unattended, could bury a man faster than any avalanche. He slowed the cruiser as he passed the town square, the tires whispering over fresh powder. The old clock tower stood at the center, its hands frozen at some forgotten repair schedule, its face rimmed with ice. A wooden bench sat beneath the lamppost at the eastern edge of the square, half buried in snow. That was when he saw her. At first, Ethan thought it was a statue someone had placed there for the holidays. The shape was too still, too perfectly positioned. But then the cruiser's headlights shifted, and he saw the faint rise and fall of a small chest. A puppy. She was sitting beside the bench, tied to its armrest with a length of frayed red rope. Her posture was straight, almost formal, like a sentry who had been given orders and intended to obey them until the world ended. She was a German Shepherd puppy, no more than 5 months old, black and tan, though the colors were dulled by dirt and frost. Snow dusted her muzzle and gathered on the ridge of her back. One of her hind legs was twisted slightly inward, trembling whenever the wind pressed harder. Her ribs were not sharply visible, but the frame beneath her coat was thin enough to speak of missed meals and colder nights. Beside her rested a small blue suitcase, the kind sold at discount stores for children, its plastic shell cracked at one corner, its handle loose. Several faded stickers, stars, a cartoon moon, the ghost of a unicorn, clung to the surface like memories that refused to be brushed away. The latch was broken. Snow had crept into the seams and filled the shallow dents. The puppy did not bark when Ethan opened the cruiser door. She did not flinch. She did not even look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the road that curved away from the square and disappeared into the trees, as though someone had promised to come back along that path, and she had decided she would not blink until they did. Ethan removed his gloves and approached slowly. The cold bit his fingers, but he welcomed it. He knelt a few feet away so he would not tower over her. "Hey," he said quietly. "It's okay. You're safe now." No reaction, not even a whine. He noticed the piece of paper tied to the rope. The ink had smeared, the edges softened by melting snow. He untied it with care and read, "She waits better than she lives. I can't save her." Ethan's throat tightened. He had seen cruelty before, abuse cases, neglected animals, families unraveling under the weight of winter, but something about the sentence unsettled him more than any scream could have. Whoever wrote it had known the puppy was loyal. They had known she would stay. And they had left anyway. The puppy's ears flicked once as Ethan shifted closer. That small movement felt enormous. "What's your name, little one?" he asked. Silence. Ethan reached for the rope, testing the knot. It was tied tight, careless, and desperate. He cut it with his pocket knife and looped the slack gently around his wrist so the puppy would not bolt. She did not move. He lifted her carefully. She was lighter than she should have been, her body warm against the cold, her heart beating fast and shallow, like a bird's. She did not resist. She did not lean into him either. Her eyes never left the road. Ethan placed her on the back seat of the cruiser, laying his jacket beneath her. He picked up the blue suitcase and set it beside her. She glanced at it briefly, then returned her gaze to the empty street. As he drove toward the shelter wing behind the Northvale police station, snow thickened around the windshield. Ethan called ahead. The early morning veterinary nurse, Nora Lang, answered. Nora was in her late 40s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight knot and eyes that missed nothing. She had worked animal care in 3 states before settling in Northvale after her husband died in a mining accident. The town respected her the way people respect mountains, without fully understanding how much weight they carry. "I found a puppy," Ethan said. "German Shepherd, tied to a bench. Looks injured. Can you meet me at intake?" "I'll be there," Nora replied without hesitation. When Ethan arrived, the shelter lights were already on. Nora and a young technician named Milo, 22, thin, nervous, kind to the point of self-neglect, waited at the door. They transferred the puppy onto a padded table. Nora examined her with practiced gentleness. She checked her gums, her eyes, her joints, murmuring observations to Milo, who scribbled notes with a shaking pen. The puppy remained motionless, her gaze drifting toward the narrow window that overlooked the frozen alley behind the building. "No microchip," Nora said. "Dehydrated, mild malnutrition, old bruising on the hind leg. We'll need x-rays later once she's warmer." "What about her like this?" Ethan asked, nodding toward the puppy's distant stare. Nora watched the dog for a long moment. Shock or shutdown. Dogs can do that after trauma. It's like they leave the room even though their body stays. Ethan's jaw tightened. "What's her name?" Milo asked. Ethan looked at the window, at the snow falling past it, at the way the puppy seemed carved out of the weather itself. "Snow," he said. "Let's call her Snow." They moved her into a quiet kennel with thick blankets and a shallow bowl of water. Ethan placed the blue suitcase just outside the door. Snow turned her head and watched it, as if checking whether it would disappear. Ethan stood there longer than his shift required. Outside, the snow kept falling, and Northvale remained asleep, unaware that a small soul had been rescued from the edge of forgetting. Snow curled in the back corner of the kennel, her face toward the door, her eyes still open. Ethan removed his badge and placed it on the counter. He leaned against the wall watching her, not speaking. He did not know it yet, but winter had just changed the course of both their lives. And Snow, silent and waiting, did not know that this was the last morning she would ever sit alone on a bench. Morning arrived without color. Northvale's sky stayed pale and heavy, as if winter itself had forgotten how to wake. Snow lay in the back corner of her kennel, her small body curved into the blankets, eyes open, unblinking, fixed on the narrow window that framed a strip of frozen alley and a drifting ribbon of white wind. The shelter was alive with the soft choreography of care. Metal doors clicking, water bowls sliding, distant barks. But inside Snow's world, nothing moved. Nora Lang entered first, carrying a tray of warm water and electrolyte mix. Nora's presence always felt like a steady pressure against the cold, the kind of woman who had learned that panic only made wounds deeper. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled tight, her coat thick and practical, her voice low and unhurried. She set the tray down and knelt at the kennel door. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said. "You're still here with us." Snow did not respond. Her ears were forward, but her gaze drifted through Nora as though Nora were only a shadow passing across glass. Behind Nora stood Milo Rivera, 22, thin and earnest, dark curls escaping his beanie. Milo had grown up in foster care, a fact he never mentioned but which explained the way he spoke to animals, like someone who knew the sound of doors closing too well. He held a clipboard and waited for Nora's cue. "She hasn't touched the water," Milo whispered. Nora nodded. "She's not ready." At the end of the corridor, Officer Ethan Cole paused, his coat dusted with fresh snow. He had finished his report at dawn and returned as promised. He stood there for a moment, watching Snow's stillness, the way her breath made the faintest cloud and then disappeared. Nora looked over her shoulder. "You came back." Ethan gave a small nod. "I said I would." Nora rose and stepped aside. "Don't push. Just be here." Ethan knelt. He removed his gloves and set them on the floor. The concrete was cold through his knees, but he did not shift. He had learned from Winter. When you want something fragile to trust you, you do not move first. He did not speak to Snow for several minutes. He simply breathed. Time in the shelter behaved differently. It stretched and curled, thinned and thickened, depending on who was waiting. Ethan counted the seconds by the rise and fall of Snow's chest, the only movement in her world. After a while, he said, "I'm Ethan. I found you yesterday. I'm not leaving." The words were soft enough that they could have been mistaken for a thought. Snow's ear twitched. Ethan noticed and did not smile. Nora watched from the doorway. She had seen dogs like this before. Shutdown was not fear. It was the absence of it. A place where hope had folded itself away for protection. Mid-morning brought the veterinarian Dr. Samuel Price, 53, tall, with a calm face that seemed carved from patience. He reviewed Snow's chart, then crouched beside Nora. "She's dehydrated," he said. "We'll start fluids, warm her slowly. X-rays once her temperature stabilizes. Her leg could be ligament damage. It's old, but not hopeless." Ethan exhaled. He had not realized he was holding his breath. When the IV line was placed, Snow did not resist. Her eyes never left the window. They moved her to a quieter kennel, patted the floor with thicker blankets, placed the blue suitcase just outside the door. Snow's gaze slid to the suitcase and stayed there for a long moment, as if checking the edge of the world. Ethan returned after lunch. He brought a paperback he had found in the station's Lost and Found, an old Western novel with a cracked spine. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall, the book open but unread. He knew better than to make Snow the subject of his attention. He let the room hold them both. Minutes passed, then an hour. Snow's head shifted by a fraction. That night, the shelter lights dimmed. The hallway softened. Ethan remained until Nora gently told him to go home. "She needs the same thing tomorrow," Nora said. "Consistency." "I'll be here," Ethan replied. At home, Ethan slept in his uniform. The dream of the bench returned, the empty road, the blue suitcase, the sentence written in water. The next morning, Snow still had not eaten. Nora mixed warm chicken broth with soft rice and set the bowl near Snow's muzzle. Snow did not move. Her eyes stayed on the window, as if the wind might shape itself into a person and come back for her. Ethan arrived mid-morning and took his place on the floor. He slid the bowl of food closer to himself, then stopped, leaving it between them. "I know," he murmured. "You don't trust this." Snow's nostrils flared. Ethan's voice remained even. "That's okay." Nora watched the small drama from the corridor. She whispered to Milo, "See? He's not trying to win. He's waiting." Milo nodded, his eyes shining. Another hour. Snow's nose turned toward the bowl. She leaned forward, sniffed once, then retreated, her gaze snapping back to the window. Ethan did not move. He opened his book and turned a page, letting the sound of paper be the only invitation. By late afternoon, Snow licked the broth, just a taste, then another. Ethan closed the book. He did not look at her. He said only, "Good." Snow's eyes flicked to him and away. Progress was not loud. It was the sound of something choosing to stay. Over the next 2 days, the pattern repeated. Snow ate more, but only when Ethan was there and only if he did not watch. Her water bowl emptied by inches. The IV came out. The warmth returned to her ears and paws. Dr. Price took X-rays, no fractures, but clear strain in the joint and ligament. He fitted a soft brace, prescribed pain medication and gentle movement once she could tolerate it. Ethan learned how to give the pills wrapped in cheese, how to support Snow's weight when she stood, how to speak without asking. Snow learned something too. She learned that the man with the quiet eyes did not vanish. On the fifth morning, Snow dragged her blanket 2 feet closer to the kennel door. The movement was slow and awkward, her injured leg trembling, but she did it anyway. She lay there, nearer to the world, nearer to Ethan's shadow on the wall. Ethan noticed when he arrived. He did not comment. He sat. Snow's gaze shifted from the window to the corridor where Ethan's boots rested. The wind outside howled, a long, hollow note through the alley. Snow's ears flattened, then lifted again. Her breath hitched. Ethan spoke, not to the storm but to the space between them. "You're not alone." Snow closed her eyes for the first time since arriving. Only for a moment. That evening, Nora brought the blue suitcase inside and set it just inside the kennel door, open. Inside were a small child's purple t-shirt with glitter on the collar, a plastic dog brush still wrapped in thin film, a crushed juice box with the straw intact. The objects were ordinary, and that was what made them hurt. Ethan watched Snow approach the suitcase, sniff the shirt, then curl against it as if it were something alive. Nora stepped away. "We don't erase the past," she said quietly. "We make room for it." Snow slept with her paw resting on the fabric. When Ethan left that night, he stopped at the door and looked back. Snow's eyes followed him. Not trust. Not yet. Recognition. He nodded once, as if to seal a promise. The quiet did not break. It bent. By the second week, Northvale's winter had learned a new rhythm. The snow still fell, but it did so in smaller, steadier breaths, as if the mountains themselves were beginning to trust the ground beneath them. Inside the shelter, time no longer felt frozen. It stretched, warmed, and slowly, carefully moved. Snow was no longer a statue. She was still quiet, still guarded, still wary of anything that resembled expectation. But she was present now. And presence, Ethan knew, was the first door back to life. Every morning at 9:10, Ethan arrived with the same routine. He removed his gloves, hung his coat on the same hook, nodded once to Nora, and went straight to Snow's kennel. He never rushed. He never spoke first. He sat. Snow learned his footsteps before she learned his voice. Her ears would lift when she heard them, not in excitement, but in recognition. That recognition grew into something else. Anticipation, perhaps, though neither of them named it. Nora tracked Snow's vitals on the wall chart. Hydration improved. Appetite stabilized. Her weight crept upward in careful increments. Dr. Price approved light physical therapy, short supported standing, minimal steps, massage to reduce tension around the injured joint. Ethan learned the exercises as if studying a new language. Snow trembled the first time he helped her stand. "Easy," Ethan murmured, one hand steady at her chest, the other supporting her hip. "We don't go fast." Her legs shook. Her breath stuttered, but she stayed upright. Milo watched from the doorway, awe written across his young face. "She's trying," he whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He was too busy being still enough for her to succeed. They practiced twice a day. 3 steps forward. Rest, 2 steps back. Sit, breathe. Try again. Snow did not whimper. She did not complain. Her determination was silent, focused, almost solemn, as if this was not healing but duty. On the 12th day, she surprised everyone. Ethan had finished the exercises and returned her to the kennel. He sat on the floor, book in his hands, waiting out the final minutes of the session. Snow lay on her blanket, eyes open, watching him. Then she moved. Not much, just a small shift of her body, a careful stretch of her front paws. But then, she dragged herself closer to the door and rested her head against the metal bars. Closer to him. Ethan did not move. He did not look. He let the moment belong to her. That night, Snow slept not in the back corner, but along the front of the kennel, facing the corridor. She did not stare at the window anymore. She watched the door. The following days brought more changes. Snow began eating while Ethan remained inside the room. Her tail, which had once been a forgotten limb, started to loosen. Not a wag, just less rigid. Her breathing, once shallow and vigilant, slowed. One afternoon, while Ethan was reading, Snow released a sound. It was barely audible. A long, shaking exhale that emptied weeks of held tension from her chest. The kind of breath a person releases after surviving something they never thought they would. Ethan looked up then. Their eyes met. Snow did not look away. That was the first true connection. Later, Nora found Ethan in the corridor with his head bowed, both hands pressed briefly to his eyes. "You're allowed to feel it," she said. He nodded once. "I know." By the third week, Snow could walk short distances with support. The brace remained in place. Her steps were uneven, but determined. Dr. Price adjusted her medication and smiled. "She's got fight," he said. "Not the loud kind, the real kind." Ethan believed him. Snow started following Ethan's movement inside the room. If he shifted, her eyes tracked him. If he stood, her head lifted. If he spoke, her ears responded. But trust was not linear. One afternoon, a metal tray fell in the adjacent corridor with a sharp clang. Snow froze, her body collapsing inward, breath caught, eyes wide and distant. She retreated to the back of the kennel and pressed herself against the wall, returning to the shape she had once been. Ethan sat down immediately. He did not reach for her. He did not speak. He stayed. Minutes passed. Snow's breath slowed. Her eyes found him again. She crept forward. Healing was not about never falling back. It was about knowing where to return. That evening, Nora brought the blue suitcase back and placed it near Snow's bedding. Snow approached it cautiously, sniffed the edges, then curled around the purple shirt inside. She rested her chin on the soft cotton as if guarding a memory she wasn't ready to lose. Ethan watched from the doorway, heart heavy and full all at once. By the fourth week, Snow had a routine. Morning, physical therapy with Ethan. Midday, meal with Nora. Afternoon, quiet time in the yard with supervised steps in the snow. Evening, rest, watching the hallway. She was still quiet, still cautious. But she was no longer waiting for the road to give her something back. She was learning to choose the room she was in. One late afternoon, as the sun sank behind the pines and painted the snow in pale gold, Ethan brought a small tennis ball he had found under the front desk. He rolled it gently across the kennel floor. Snow sniffed it. She nudged it once with her nose. Then she sat down. Ethan smiled. "That's okay," he said. "You don't have to play." Snow turned and rested her chin against his knee. It was not dramatic. It was not sudden. It was everything. Milo, watching from across the room, covered his mouth. Nora stood beside him, her eyes shining. "She chose him," Milo whispered. Nora nodded. "She's choosing the world again." Ethan did not speak. He simply placed his hand on the floor beside Snow's paw and stayed there until the light faded from the room. Outside, the wind carried new snow across North Vale's streets, but inside the shelter something had already changed. Snow was no longer just surviving winter. She was returning from it. North Vale's winter did not announce its storms. It only leaned closer to the earth until everything else grew quiet. That night the wind arrived without warning. It came low and restless through the trees, pressing snow against windows, rattling the loose sign on the shelter's back fence, whispering across the yard where Snow had taken her first uncertain steps only hours earlier. The evening staff moved with practiced calm, closing doors, securing the storage shed, checking kennels one final time before lights out. In the supply room, Milo was counting blankets. He was tired, his shift already longer than planned, his thoughts drifting toward the bus ride home and the leftover soup waiting in his refrigerator. When the delivery driver knocked, Milo stepped outside for just a moment to sign the clipboard. The wind shoved at the door behind him. He did not notice the latch had not fully caught when he returned inside. No one did. By midnight, the shelter had settled into its slow breathing. Snow lay near the front of her kennel, her chin on the blanket, eyes open. The hall lights were dim. The blue suitcase rested by the wall where Ethan had left it earlier that evening. Snow's ears twitched when a new sound threaded through the building, the soft, unfamiliar sigh of air moving where it should not. The back door shifted. The wind pressed again. The door opened no more than a hand's width. It was enough. Snow lifted her head. Her body did not panic. There was no scramble, no burst of fear. Instead, something older and deeper stirred, a quiet pull she had never learned how to resist. The leash that normally hung at the kennel was clipped loosely to the gate from earlier cleaning. Snow nudged it aside with her nose and stepped out. She did not hurry. She followed the thin ribbon of cold air, her steps careful, her injured leg still stiff beneath the brace, but steady. Down the corridor, past the storage shelves, toward the back. The door waited. Snow slipped through. The night swallowed her. By the time Nora made her late check at 12:37 a.m., the hallway felt wrong. She noticed the air first. Too cold, too sharp. Then the open door. Then the empty kennel. "Snow?" she whispered. Her voice echoed. Nora ran for the phone. Ethan was awake when the call came. He had been sitting at his kitchen table, badge beside a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, reading the same paragraph of the same book for the fourth time without seeing the words. "Ethan," Nora said, breathless. "She's gone. The back door. Wind must have forced it. We think she slipped out minutes ago." Ethan was already pulling on his coat. "Which way?" "I don't know." Ethan did. He drove with his headlights cutting through thick snow, tires skidding slightly at each turn, heart pounding in a way he had not felt since the night he lost his brother to the storm 5 years earlier. Northvale's streets were empty, the town wrapped in white and silence. He did not go to the highway, he went to the square. The same lamppost, the same bench, and there she was. Snow sat beside it, exactly where Ethan had found her the first time. Same posture, same stillness. The blue suitcase was not there, but Ethan could almost see it, the ghost of it resting in the snow. Snow's eyes were locked on the road beyond the square, the dark ribbon of pavement disappearing into the trees. She had come back to wait. Ethan parked the cruiser and approached slowly. Snow did not turn her head. The wind carved its voice across the square. Snowflakes clung to her whiskers. Ethan sat down beside her. For a long minute, neither of them spoke. "You thought they'd come back," Ethan said finally. Snow blinked once. "You ran," he continued softly. "Not away from us, back to them." Her ears lowered slightly. Ethan's throat tightened. He looked down the road with her. It was empty. It had been empty for a long time. "They're not coming," he said. "But I am, and I will be tomorrow, and the next day, as long as you're here." Snow shifted. Slowly, carefully, she leaned her shoulder against Ethan's leg. Not a flinch, not a test, a decision. Ethan closed his eyes. He looped the loose leash around his wrist, rising carefully. "Let's go home." Snow stood. Her leg trembled, but she stepped forward. Together, they walked back through the storm. Back at the shelter, Ethan spread a blanket on the floor beside Snow's kennel and lay down, one hand near her paw. Snow did not retreat to the corner. She curled against his side, her breath warm and steady against his coat. Sometime before morning, she released a soft, content sound, a sound that did not belong to fear or memory. It belonged to peace. Morning did not arrive suddenly in Northvale. It unfolded the way trust does, slow, careful, almost afraid of being noticed. Snow stood at the front of her kennel when Ethan arrived, not lying in the corner, not watching the window, standing. Her weight was still uneven on the injured leg, the soft brace snug around her joint, but there was something new in her posture. A quiet pride, a readiness. Ethan stopped just inside the doorway. "Well," he said gently, "look at you." Snow's tail lifted. Not a full wag, yet, but the tip of it moved, a small, hopeful comma at the end of a long sentence. Nora watched from the desk, pretending to sort paperwork so she wouldn't stare. Snow ate breakfast while Ethan remained inside the room. She drank water, then followed him a few steps when he stood. Outside, the yard glowed white under fresh snow, the mountains etched against a pale sky. That was the day Snow barked. Just once. A sharp, clear sound that froze the entire building. Milo dropped a bucket. Nora's head snapped up. Ethan laughed aloud. "That's my girl," he said. Snow blinked, surprised by herself. From that morning on, Snow began reclaiming things. She chose a toy from the bin, a frayed green rope knotted at both ends, and guarded it like treasure. She slept in the sunlight near the fence with her belly exposed, a posture of safety. She nudged the other dogs when they passed her kennel, curious, present, learning the language of life again. At night, she no longer slept in the back. She slept near the door, waiting, not for ghosts, but for Ethan. When he stayed late finishing reports, Snow would not lie down until she saw him pass. One evening, he tested it, standing just out of view. Snow sat upright, ears twitching, eyes locked on the hallway. When he stepped forward, she lowered herself with a small sigh, as if her watch was complete. "You've imprinted," Nora told him softly. Ethan did not answer. He was too busy realizing that letting go was going to be the hardest part of this entire rescue. By the 5th week, people began to notice Snow. Visitors came in pairs, in families, with hopeful eyes and folded brochures. Dogs barked and bounced. Snow did neither. She sat quietly, ears forward, gaze steady, as if she were older than time itself. A boy stopped outside her kennel one afternoon. He was about 9, curly hair escaping from a blue knit cap, his coat too thin for the weather. He crouched and whispered something through the bars. Snow stood, walked to him, and sat. The boy's mother tugged his sleeve. "No, honey, she looks sick." "She's not sick," he said. "She's sad." They left. Snow returned to her blanket, shoulders sinking just slightly. Ethan clenched his fists in his pockets. Later that day, Ethan took Snow into the yard as the sun slid toward evening. The sky turned the color of warm honey. He brought the tennis ball again. Snow sniffed it, pawed it once, then sat. "You don't have to play," Ethan said. "You don't have to do anything." Snow turned and rested her chin on his knee. Ethan froze. That small, trusting weight cracked something open in him that had been sealed since the night his brother's car vanished beneath the snow. Nora stood in the doorway with tears on her cheeks. "She picked you," she mouthed. But it wasn't that simple. Snow needed more than a man who worked double shifts and slept in a small apartment. She needed a home, a yard, a life beyond the walls of a shelter. And then they walked in. The woman's name was Claire Reed. 33 years old, average height, slender, with dark hair falling loosely around her face. Her eyes were soft but tired in a way that only came from carrying grief carefully for a long time. She moved with gentleness, as if the world were made of glass. Beside her was Jonah Reed, 35, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a gray sweatshirt and running shoes. His face was calm, but his hands betrayed him, fingers curling and uncurling like someone used to holding on to things that slipped away. They spoke to Nora at the desk. "We're not here for a specific dog," Claire said. "We just want to see who needs us." Nora glanced toward Ethan. "Snow?" Ethan's heart stuttered. He clipped on Snow's leash and crouched in front of her. "Let's go meet someone, okay?" Snow stood willingly. Her limp remained, but her confidence did not waver. In the visitation room, Claire knelt immediately. "Hi there," she whispered. Snow stopped, watched them, ears forward, eyes steady. Ethan sat in the corner, silent. Snow walked slowly to Claire, paused, then sat. She leaned forward just enough for her nose to rest on Claire's hand. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Jonah crouched beside them. He did not touch Snow. He let her choose. She stepped closer and rested her chin on his leg. They stayed like that for a long time. Later, in the office, they told their story. 7 years of trying for a child, endless appointments, quiet heartbreak. Last month, their doctor said, "You need to let go and make space for something else." "So we came here," Claire said. Jonah nodded. "We saw her photo online. She looked like she was waiting." "She was," Ethan said, steadying his voice, "but not for the past." They asked about Snow's care, her fears, her leg. What made her calm? What made her feel safe? They did not ask if she knew how to sit. Before they left, Claire knelt again. "If you come with us," she whispered to Snow, "we won't try to fix you. We'll just love you." Snow looked at Ethan. Then she wagged her tail. Twice. Ethan knew. Winter loosened its grip on Northvale the morning Snow was adopted. The snow still fell, but it did so gently now, like the world had learned how to touch without hurting. Ethan stood in the hallway outside the shelter office, hands clasped behind his back, listening as Nora went over the paperwork with Claire and Jonah Reed. The process had taken weeks. Home checks, medical plans, training schedules, legal holds. Everything done the right way, slowly, carefully, because Snow's story deserved nothing less. Inside the kennel, Snow waited at the door, not in the corner, not curled into herself. Standing. Her brace had been adjusted again that morning. Her coat shone with new health, thick and warm, black and tan catching the light like polished stone. Her eyes followed every movement Ethan made. "You ready, girl?" he whispered. Snow's tail swept once across the floor. In the office, Claire signed the final line. Jonah's hand rested on her shoulder, steady and protective, like two people who had learned how to survive disappointment without letting it harden them. Claire was tall and slender, her dark hair tied back loosely, her face soft with emotion that had nowhere left to hide. Jonah, broad-shouldered and quiet, carried himself like a man who had once been broken and stitched himself together with patience. When Nora slid the folder across the desk, the room went silent. "Congratulations," she said. Claire covered her mouth. Jonah exhaled like he had been holding his breath for years. Ethan clipped Snow's new harness in place, soft gray, properly fitted, medical tag shining against her chest. Snow did not flinch. She stood proud. As they walked down the hallway together, Snow slowed near the supply cabinet. Ethan knew what she was looking for. He opened the cabinet and pulled out the blue suitcase. It looked smaller now, lighter, less important. Snow stepped forward, sniffed it once, then rested her paw on the cracked corner. Her ears flicked back, then forward. Claire crouched beside her. "We won't erase her past," she said softly to Ethan. "We'll carry it with her until she doesn't need it anymore." Ethan nodded. His throat closed. He handed Claire the purple shirt from inside the suitcase. "For her," he said. "She sleeps with it." Claire's eyes shimmered. "We'll keep it somewhere she can see it. Not as pain, as memory." Snow leaned her head against Ethan's knee, just once. Not desperate, not afraid, grateful. Outside, the sky was pale blue, the snow sparkling like glass. Jonah opened the back door of their car. Snow stepped up without hesitation. She turned once and looked at Ethan. Not like someone being left, like someone being released. Ethan raised his hand in a small salute. Snow's tail lifted, and then she was gone. That night, Ethan's apartment felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. He cooked dinner, ate without tasting it, sat on the couch with the television on and the sound turned low. Around 10, he stood and walked to the hallway where Snow's things had been boxed. He pulled out the suitcase, unzipped it. Inside, only the brush remained. Ethan sat on the floor and held it for a long time. "She wasn't broken," he whispered to the empty room. "She was waiting." The next morning, Nora met him at the shelter door with her phone in her hand. "Message for you." It was a video. Snow lay between Claire and Jonah on their couch, her head in Claire's lap, Jonah's hand resting on her side. A blanket tucked around her, firelight flickering on the wall. Snow's back leg twitched in sleep, relaxed, and safe. The caption read, "She hasn't moved from our side all night. She's home. Thank you." Ethan watched it twice. Then he went to work. 3 days later, Claire and Jonah returned with snow. She walked through the shelter doors like she owned them. Her coat shone. Her body was stronger. Her tail moved with confidence. She wanted to visit, Claire said. Snow trotted straight to Ethan and pressed her forehead against his chest. Ethan laughed. "Hey, miracle." They brought cookies for the staff and something else. A framed photo. Snow running across the snow-covered field outside their home, ears flying, tongue out, mid-leap, like gravity had finally lost its grip on her. "For the front desk," Jonah said. "For the next one." They stayed a while. Snow explored, calm and curious. When Ethan brought out the suitcase, Snow sniffed it again, then turned away and walked back to Claire's side. She no longer needed it to stand between her and the world. When they left, Snow looked back at Ethan one last time. Not waiting. Remembering. Weeks passed. Spring whispered at the edge of winter. Ethan received photos every few days. Snow curled in sunlight by the window. Snow sleeping between Claire and Jonah, always touching both. Snow walking the bluffs above the frozen river, brace removed for short stretches. One message stayed with him most. A photo of Snow sitting at the top of the staircase, ears perked, eyes on the front door. The caption read, "She still waits, not from fear, from hope, for us to come home every day." Ethan stared at that image a long time. Then he understood. Snow was not waiting for someone to fix her. She was waiting for someone worth trusting. And she had found them. One quiet afternoon, Claire arrived alone with a package. Inside was a small framed photo. Snow running across the beach near the lake outside town. The blue suitcase sitting on a shelf in the background of their home, bathed in sunlight. "It's not grief," Claire said. "It's gratitude." They placed it at the front desk. For every dog that came next. That night, Ethan walked past Snow's old kennel without stopping. Inside it, a new arrival, a small beagle mix named Rusty, 6 weeks old, thin and shaking, watched him. Ethan went in, sat down, waited, because he knew now. Every story begins the same way, with silence, and someone willing to stay inside it long enough for the first tail to wag. Outside, Snow ran across a frozen field, her legs strong, her heart light, the world wide open in front of her. She was not waiting anymore. She was living. Sometimes God does not send a miracle from the sky. He sends a moment of patience, a quiet heart, and the courage to stay when it would be easier to walk away. Snow was never broken. She was waiting for someone to love her, the way God loves us without conditions, without giving up, without leaving. And maybe today someone in your life is waiting the same way. Not for perfection, just for presence, just for kindness, just for someone willing to stay. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment and tell us what part moved you the most, and do not forget to subscribe to our channel so more stories of light can reach the world. May God bless you and your family. May peace follow you wherever you go, and if you believe in the power of love and second chances, type Amen in the comments so we can pray together.